Hello and welcome back. We are in the 12th module now, that is the 12th week, last week of the course. So, in this module we have been looking at the various kinds of language related disorders. Language disorders, sometimes they may co-occur with other cognitive disorders, sometimes they might occur on their own. So, we have looked at, we have discussed already specific language impairment, and we have also discussed Williams syndrome, where there is no language related disorder as such, but there is cognitive disorder. Now, these two disorders were discussed in terms of whether language and other cognitive mechanisms can be separate to some extent if they are separate. And so, today we will look at some other disorders, some other neurodevelopmental disorders where there seem to be a relationship between language and cognitive disorders, they are not separate. So, while they have certain kinds of cognitive disorders, certain kinds of physiological issues, they also have language related delays or disorders. So, that is the second part of that understanding of how far language and other cognitive mechanisms are related as seen through disorders. So, this is lecture 3. Here we will talk about the other the second group of disorders. Now, this within the neurodevelopmental disorders of various kinds, of course, we will not be able to go through all of them, but the few that we will discuss also share this same issue, which is the issue of inbuilt heterogeneity. Now, what do we mean by inbuilt heterogeneity? It is that even though this category groups diverse disorders together, often there is a significant amount of overlap. Now, the overlap can be in terms of the language related problems, they can also be in terms of the other cognitive disorders. So, it is not very easy to parse them together. Certain features which are, let us say, part of ADHD can also be seen in case of ASD and so on. So, similarly, each of these also show a high level of heterogeneity. So, for example, in case of ASD, autism spectrum disorder, not all children suffering from ASD will have the exact same kind of clinical repercussions. So, they might have different levels of linguistic delay, or they might also have different levels of social behavioral kind of an output. So, as a result of which these treatment or clinical intervention require expertise of a diverse range of professionals like child psychiatrist, psychologist, pediatrician, speech and language therapist, occupational therapist and so on. And then of course, this also needs help and support of various sectors like health and education together, because when we are talking about special children, special education needs of these children, of course, you need to combine both education and health department together. So, that is what makes NDDs a very specific kind of a case. So, heterogeneity in terms of symptoms, outcome and treatment response across all neurodevelopmental and psychiatric disorders is a very common hallmark of these disorders that we will discuss together. So, we will start with developmental dyslexia. It is quite commonly understood, very well studied. In fact, they are also part of the popular imagination because of films and so on. So, this is an area which has been studied more than the other neurodevelopmental disorders of similar nature. Now, what is dyslexia? This is quite a prevalent neurodevelopmental disorder. Now, this will typical hallmark of this disorder is difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition and spelling. These are the most important and most visible problems with respect to developmental dyslexia. In spite of these are people, they do not have generally they do not have much cognitive disorders, cognitive disabilities. They have normal sensory abilities, they will have comparable or average intelligence, comparable with their age matched and mental age matched and chronological age matched controls and so on. So, on the surface they are like anybody else, however, with a severe issue with recognizing and understanding words the spellings and the recognition of the spelling. So, this has been, as I just said, this has been studied since a long time. One of the oldest references that we have is goes back to 1878, where he talked about word blindness, because the recognition, they do not understand, they do not recognize the words as they are. So, it was initially called word blindness to describe patients who had lost the ability to read, but had their oral and non-verbal intelligence intact. Oral as in verbal intelligence, verbal and non-verbal IQ, that was intact. So, these were the patients that he reported had lost their ability. They were not born with that disability, they had lost it as a result of stroke or some other such issues. So, in this case he reported that their ability to read was gone, however, all other abilities were intact. The name dyslexia came a slightly little later. This name was given in 1884 by Rudolf Berlin. Another important name in this in the early studies on dyslexia is that of Pringle Morgan. He described his famous case of congenital word blindness. So, the term that was used for to denote this kind of people, this kind of disorder was word blindness. So, word blindness in case of the first one, that he reported on a patient who had become word blind, but in case of others that they reported, most importantly Morgan, he reported a child who was not able to read. His name was Percy. So, that is why he called it congenital word blindness. So, in the initial stages of dyslexia research, it was considered to be primarily a problem of visual perception, but primarily a problem with understanding something to do with the visual analysis, visual acuity. The reason for disability was basically pinned on visual processing problem, which selectively targeted written words. That visual processing problem did not affect anything else, only in case of written words. So, that is when the problem happened, because they could not read. Now, another problem with dyslexia often is that it is confused, or it is even interchangeably used with poor reading capacity, and that actually that becomes a very difficult issue to solve, because dyslexia also can be severe or less severe, mild, moderate, and so on. So, where to draw the boundary between a poor reader and a person suffering from dyslexia, that also is a matter of discussion in this domain. In any case, so initial diagnosis was about visual processing problem, which would selectively affect only written words, and this was hereditary. This was considered to be hereditary. A little later in the early 1900s, Samuel Orton focused on the letter and the word reversal, which is a very common error among dyslexics. So, they will read, for example, they will read was and saw as interchangeably. So, if it is reading was for the word saw. So, this is where there is a reversal happening. This is something that was studied by Samuel Orton, and based on his studies he hypothesized that the visual problem. So, we are still with the visual problem. So, visual problem arose because of a hemispheric dominance failure in which mirror images of visual stimuli were not inhibited. So, that is how he hypothesized the problem to be. So, it is a visual problem, visual processing problem, and that probably came out of a hemispheric dominance failure, where the mirror image could not be inhibited. So, they were looking at the word, but they were actually processing the mirror image. That is how he proposed it. Later research followed, and then the idea was that around 1950s, after generative syntax came into existence, Chomsky's influence, generative phonology was born out of it, and the entire understanding of dyslexia changed as a result of that, and hence the visual perception angle was kind of sidelined. It was not considered important anymore, because now the understanding of dyslexia was from the perspective of phonology. So, though it is kind of coming back, some understanding of visual processings, visual acuity may have something to do with the dyslexia, but on a larger scale, visual perception is not the culprit. That is where we are today. So, of late scientific consensus for the last several decades is this, that dyslexia is a language based disorder whose primary underlying deficit involves problems in phonological processing. So, this is where we are as a result of the phonological understanding of dyslexia, which in turn goes back to the generative phonology, understanding of generative phonology. So, this letter as a because they have this understanding, there is this particular thing missing, which is the phonological awareness. Remember, we talked about phonological awareness and the understanding of mapping between the sound and the orthography and phoneme grapheme phoneme mapping. So, that part apparently is missing in these patients. So, if it is missing, this will later have problem in case of processing with other kinds of language, namely written language. So, that is where there was a shift from the visual perception angle to the phonological angle. So, as a result of which phonological theory of dyslexia changed the way we look at it. So, according to this theory, dyslexic children fail to learn to read because they fail to acquire the skill of separating the sounds in a word to match with its visual letter counterparts. So, the phoneme grapheme mapping is what they are not able to do. This is the understanding. So, the establishment and automatization of letter sound correspondence, which happens pretty early in life, is what the dyslexics do not have. So, this is, of course, this is what we just referred to as phonemic awareness. Now, though majority of the data on the initial studies of data on dyslexia come from alphabetic languages like English. So, it is it was considered like grapheme, there is a direct grapheme phoneme connection. So, you have the letter corresponding to some kind of a sound. So, that was initial finding. However, later studies have also taken into account other kinds of languages like Chinese, and the similar kind of problem was reported from there as well. Now, the current view is that remember we talked about the multi deficit versus single deficit kind of understanding of various kinds of disorders. So, based on that, now we know that current view in dyslexia also is that single core phonological deficit is not sufficient to explain reading difficulties. So, like any other behavioral disorder, dyslexia, the etiology of dyslexia also is complex and multifactorial. So, today's understanding of dyslexia is that it is multifactorial, and these are various kinds of issues that have been pointed out. So, for example, phonological awareness, rapid serial naming, verbal short term memory, vocabulary and other aspects of broader oral language skills and graphomotor processing speed. So, all of them have to have been found alongside just the reading difficulty. So, children with multiple cognitive deficits are at a much higher risk of having dyslexia, and those factors are these. So, it is not only one kind of unlike the SLI, which is specific language impairment, a very specific kind of a problem. Here we are seeing that dyslexia also can have multifactorial origin. So, this is a more current view. So, starting with the very specific visual perception problem that affects only reading. From there to phonological theory of dyslexia, where we are looking at only the grapheme and phoneme mapping problem, to now we see that there is a multifactorial probably origin of dyslexia that affects many other problems. Of late, there is a renewed interest in visual deficit as well. So, some recent studies have brought in new understanding primarily on visual attentional deficit. So, it is not about the processing deficits in the sense the way it was seen before, but now it is looked at from the visual attentional deficit perspective. So, in a recent study, they demonstrated that performance on visual attention task in preschool children significantly predicted reading difficulty in later years, ability 2 years later. So, similar patterns of results are reported across writing systems and with varying degrees of letter sound relationship. So, for example, in case of French, the mapping between sound and the letter will not is not that straightforward, let us say. So, comparing between Italian and French, also they have found out that this kind of pattern of result is can hold for both kinds of languages. So, where the letter sound relationship is consistent and where it is not consistent and so on. So, there seem to be a mapping between the visual attentional level and reading ability in a later stage. Of course, now we also have a lot of brain imaging studies done on dyslexic patients. So, we also have some understanding of the brain basis of dyslexia. Imaging studies have reported significant abnormalities in cerebral connectivity as well as the cortical structure. So, it is not only the anatomical aspect, not only the cortical structure, but also the connectional architecture that have been found to be affected by this in case of this kind of patients. There is quite a bit of study in a specific domain in case of brain imaging studies. For example, the magnocellular development, which has been the focus of many studies recently. Magnocellular development is slightly different in case of dyslexic patient as opposed to typically developing children. So, this is one. So, in dyslexics, the magnocellular responses are reduced in both the retina and the lateral geniculate nucleus, which is LGN. So, in these two areas are the most easy to explore areas in terms of magnocellular structure, but they also exist in other areas in the brain, but these are the two areas where it is more clearly visible, and hence most of the data come from these two areas. And their underactivations also have been found in two posterior left hemisphere regions. One is the temporoparietal region, believed to be crucial for phonological processing and phoneme graphing conversion, which is expected, and then we also have occipitotemporal region, including so called visual word form area. So, these two areas have been they also have shown underactivation, as in less than optimal activation in these two areas. These two areas are very important for reading, for visual word processing, visual language processing. So, you see underactivation in these area also. So, underactivation in certain crucial brain regions have been found in case of dyslexic patients, specifically the visual word form area as well as the area which is responsible for which is thought to be responsible for grapheme phoneme conversion. So, these are important findings in terms of the brain basis of dyslexia. And then we also have comorbidity, that is dyslexia can often co-occur with other cognitive disorders, most notably with ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Comorbidity with ADHD, dyslexia is comorbid with two other disorders as well. For example, in terms of language development, for example, language impairment and speech sound disorders. So, and yet another domain that is now being explored is what is called the environmental genetics. This is yet another area which is where basically they look at the environmental impact and environment having a relationship with the genetic structure. So, environmental genetics is another domain that is now getting explored in terms of what might be the other factors in terms of dyslexia patients, what else might be affected and how it might be affected. So, that is what about dyslexia. We have now seen that dyslexia, though it is predominantly a language disorder, but it can have comorbidity with other behavioral problems, for example, ADHD, and as well as other language related problems. And similarly, it also has, it is not just a simple problem of identifying the phonemes and with respect to their sounds, with respect to their visual representation, but it also has a brain basis. Now, let us move on to autism spectrum disorder. This is yet another domain that has been studied quite a lot. There is adequate amount of literature available as well. So, ASD is characterized by social and behavioral impairments. Primarily, this is primarily a social and cognitive problem. Behavioral impairments such as verbal and non-verbal communication, social functioning and patterns of restricted and repetitive behavior or interest. This is the definition given by American Psychiatric Association about ASD, autism spectrum disorder. So, this is prevalence is of 18.5 per 1000 people in general population as per some estimates, recent estimates. So, it is quite prevalent. So, the characteristic feature of ASD is the lack of social and communicative skills. So, it is not only the non-verbal behavior, but also verbal behavior, both get affected in case of ASD, and that is why we are discussing this here. So, autism is argued to be the result of impairment of the domain specific mechanism of meta representation dedicated solely to the processing of social stimuli. So, what does it basically mean? This means this is there is a deficit in the theory of mind module. Remember when we discussed theory of mind as the concept of theory of mind, we discussed that this is one of the important markers for finding out, for diagnosing atypical children in certain domains. So, ASD is one such domain, because they have a domain specific problem, domain specific impairment which is responsible for theory of mind development. So, when non-social impairments are noted, they are explained in terms of secondary effects. So, non-social impairments are also there, but they are typically explained in terms of as a secondary effect, but they are not the primary problem. Now, in terms of language deficit in ASD, social communication impairment is of course the most telltale sign. So, where they will not be able to take part in a conversation. In a conversation, we have seen that there are certain rules of conversation in any kind of language scenario, be it any language, any community, any language. So, you have to maintain the topic, you have greetings, and all those things are part of conversation. In case of autistic children, those things are missing. So, they cannot take appropriate turn taking is difficult for them, they cannot maintain the topic, they don't have greetings as part of their vocabulary and so on. Because these skills depend on the theory of mind, and because theory of mind is severely affected, language output in those domains are also severely affected. Like all other cases, we have seen this before, that expressive vocabulary versus receptive vocabulary, there will be some sort of an asymmetry. Expressive vocabulary is always less than the receptive vocabulary. The same thing you see here as well, and the semantics and syntax also get affected. So, there is an overall language related delay and disorder, as you see in case of ASD children. However, this is variable, because this is a spectrum, as we said. So, the children who fall on the other end of the spectrum, that the severity rate is high, in those cases all areas of language functions will be affected severely. So, syntax, semantics and vocabulary, everything will be very severely affected. But if you come to the the moderate range, then their language abilities may not be that severe, and in fact there are some children who are still within the spectrum, but they might have good enough, comparably good enough language skills. That is also possible. So, it is a variable, you see a lot of variability within the same spectrum. Subdomain of vocabulary: production and comprehension of personal pronouns, mental state terms and prepositions are generally found to be affected. Another important domain with respect to ASD population is the domain of executive function. Executive function mechanism is one of the higher mental functions, higher cognitive functions in humans. So, this includes shifting, attention, inhibition, working memory, planning and so on. So, basically this is something that is part of your flexible intelligence, fluid intelligence as we call it today. So, this is what decides how to allocate attention, how do you selectively attend to the goal oriented stimuli for that particular moment. And then similarly at the same time you have to be also open to updating your attention in terms of the different kinds of incoming stimuli. And then of course working memory is another part of this entire EF network, and planning of course. So, many studies find ASD children deficient in all of these tasks, not all again because it is a spectrum. So, some children actually do quite well in terms of selective attention. In fact, many ASD children have been found they are one of the typical marker of ASD is that they are able to fixate on one thing for a prolonged period of time, and also repetitive behavior is a hallmark of their disorder. So, sometimes some of these functions are actually there. So, selective attention is there, but in many cases it is not there. Often these deficits are found when the relevant task had a language component to it. So, these deficits when you have a language component to it, they tend to be doing worse in that. Studies have also reported a connection between language and EF deficiency in ASD children. Probably these arise out of the, remember we talked about initially when we talked about theories of language evolution, theories of language acquisition, there was this constructivism talks about language appearing at a stage when they have the sensory motor stage is over. So, the schemata is already in place and language gives them a label, and what follows is something called internal dialogue. They talk to themselves and over a period of time that speaking to oneself, egocentric speech becomes what is called thought. This is something that is understood to be missing in case of these children, and that is why it is said that the connection between language and ASD is there. The connection between language and EF in ASD children is found because of this, because they do not use language skills internally to facilitate goal direct behavior, which is a common hallmark of children. Children speak to themselves, talk to themselves. Over a period of time, that becomes that self talk becomes silent, and this is what becomes thought. Probably autistic children do not engage in that, and that is why we see that the markers that we see. So, now there are certain factors responsible for ASD. The one is of course heritability. This both ASD and SLI are considered relatively highly heritable. SLI we have seen that one entire family had multiple members with SLI. ASD may not be that prevalent in the family, but there are some studies that have reported heritability of this as well. So, this is the reason an older diagnosed child or a first degree relative with the similar disorder can lead researchers to predict the same or at least take the probability into consideration for a still undiagnosed child at risk. What this means is, if there is a child in a family, the eldest child let us say having ASD, then the researcher can predict that another close relative or a sibling might ultimately be at risk. They may not be showing the signs of ASD yet, but they might eventually. So, this is one outcome of this is possible only when if it is heritable, right. So, that is there are certain cases where this has been found to be true. Genetic encoding of NDDs. So, many disorders like Down syndrome, Williams syndrome and Fragile X syndrome have genetic causes and can be diagnosed before birth as well. Today of course, we have medical science has progressed so much, they can be diagnosed before, and also sometimes even interventions are prescribed. However, finding genetic links to SLI and ASD is a recent development, and studies are quickly catching up on this front as well. Prior to this, these two conditions have been exclusively diagnosed on behavioral criteria. So, only when the child is exhibiting the signs of the problem, that is when they were diagnosed, but now we can diagnose them before birth as well. So, genetic markers for ASD like FOXP2 is associated with SLI. ASD susceptibility loci have also been found in many, there were many loci that have been found for ASD susceptibility as well. SLI and ASD have also been found to share some genetic vulnerability features. Several genes that are regulated by FOXP2 have been associated with ASD and SLI, including a particular gene so called CNTCNAP2, This particular gene is associated with both language impairment and ASD. So, FOXP2 controls certain other genetic components, one of them is this, and this has been found to be connected to the development of autism spectrum disorder as well. I recently discovered copy number variant on chromosome 16p11 is associated with a range of phenotypes including ASD and speech and language impairment associated with ASD. So, there appears to be some genetic markers for autism spectrum disorder as well. As we already have seen that SLI does have a genetic marker which is the FOXP2 gene. Similarly, for ASD some findings have been pointing towards the same. Neural markers also exist for ASD. Recent trend of research with particularly with brain imaging studies have shown atypical lateralization of the language network, which is not the way it is for the typically developing children. So, temporal cortices were found to have reduced activation in comparison with TD children when listening to bedtime stories. So, not only the lateralization, that is the network level difference is there, but also activation level difference has been found with respect to ASD children. Also, they show higher activation in the right rather than the left anterior superior temporal gyrus. So, basically the activation pattern is not comparable to the typically developing neurotypical children. So, the activation as well as some kind of atypical lateralization has been found in terms of this children. Also, decreased spontaneous interhemispheric synchronization in terms of the language related areas. So, there is some amount of when we speak, when we engage in language related activities, there is a spontaneous synchronization between the hemispheres. So, that is also found to be decreased in case of ASD children. Now, this decreased synchronization are directly connected to language as well as other markers of ASD. For example, this is positively correlated with language ability and negatively correlated with the severity of ASD symptoms. Also, this is not present in comparable SLI toddlers. So, this kind of problem, this decreased synchronization is not part of SLI toddlers, which means this factor is more connected to social communication rather than language per se. This comparison is important because in case of SLI, they do have a language deficit, but it is not a social problem. So, this is what they find using brain mapping as well, that in case of SLI children, this decreased synchronization is not there, which means this synchronization is important marker for social communication rather than language related understanding, language related underlying capacity, right. So, atypical idea lateralization was found in infants as young as 6 to 9 months, well before other symptoms emerged. So, because of this, because now you can diagnose ASD much before the time for language to evolve has not yet come. So, between 6 to 9 months is before they have started speaking in words as well. So, that time also the atypical lateralization has been found. So, that means there is this is as early as it gets for in terms of diagnosis. Comorbidity also is there, comorbidity as we have seen for many other diseases, this ASD also have comorbidity. So, because of which treatment and interventions focus on the predominant features and it has its own benefits, because depending on if you have to because in case of ASD the primary problem is social communication, social theory of mind, social behavior and interaction with other agents in the society and so on. So, these are the predominant features. So, even though there are comorbidities, treatment typically will interventions will typically address the predominant features. However, hierarchical methods may lead to lack of diagnosis of certain disorders in individuals with multiple neurodevelopmental problems, because there are hierarchical methods. So, if you are not focusing on all of them, then you might be missing out on something. So, today's intervention methods actually take into account multi-pronged approach, not just looking at the most dominant disorder, but also looking at all the connected disorders. So, that is where we are today. So, this is where we will end lecture 3. In lecture 4, we will take up another disorder as well as some intervention methods of today. Thank you.